afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the LLF Saturday afternoon event, Heavens to Mordecai. Our sponsors, many of whom have actively supported this festival since its inception 17 years ago, are a truly terrific group indeed, and without their strong and continued support, we really could not exist. As I said last night, your gift to the Lakefield Literary Festival is the freedom to do this year after year, to plan unencumbered, and to be stronger than ever when the 20th year comes around, only 3 years down the road.
Charlie and I want to have a conversation, which we hope you'll all eventually join, so we're going to move just a little bit closer, because we're kind of waving at each other.
We haven't been this far away in 5 years.
When you edit, you work very closely with someone. Is that good? But also, are you sure? He doesn't believe this?
I apologize. Carry on, Louise.
Yeah. This is how the whole relationship, this book is the result of this. He's also, though, one of our great novelists. And it was that particular range of being able to understand literature so well, and also his ability to bring a world, and in this case a man and his life and times and his family to life in a way that required that extraordinary and wonderful kind of fictional overview of the whole, even though finding the truth was what this whole book was about.
10 years ago, he was a close friend of yours, as well as someone you edited in his final decade of his life. How hard was it to sign over to a near stranger myself the opportunity or the privilege of writing about his life?
It was hard, and in fact, we had for a number of years, almost from the time that Mordecai died, as a publishing house, we had been considering who would be able to take on this task, given how complicated and complex Mordecai was, and what controversies surrounded him, who could really do this well and capture this man in a way that would reveal him for all he was in all that complexity. And there were a number of proposals that came our way from a number of writers, and it has to be said that from the very start, Florence Richler, and she and Mordecai had, as many of you may know, the most loving marriage for so many decades. And so she was clearly going to be very involved in that choice, because when you come to putting together a biography, you need to open doors for the biographer. And when a writer or the subject has only recently died, friends and family are apt to remain understandably very close with their memories. They want to hold on to them, they're personal. They're still not sure about handing them over to the public view, because they're precious to them. And so it needed Florence, who is hugely respected by everyone, the beautiful Florence, to give her blessing to whoever was going to be the biographer. But I think this is why Charlie's biography is so magnificent, and why it has not only won all these awards but been such a bestseller, because it's so engaging on a human level. We know that you as the biographer are not trying to tell, some particular truth as far as you see, but you make such engaging, imaginative efforts to put us there, so that we as a reader can almost make up our own mind as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, as Charlie said at the beginning, that preface is the only time that you really set out what you think and what you're trying to do. And after that, you leave, and this is rare, and this is what makes great biography, you leave us to also make our decisions. You give it as far as you can see it, and you give it as well as you can see it, which is brilliantly and insightfully, but then we're kind of left to make up our own minds as well, just as a child can be when a sibling has a different perspective of an event that happened, or actually who loved who best, and all those.
Yes. I did file a slightly overlong draft.
I think by about...
it's about 80,000 words longer than this.
Yeah.
So it's like another good-sized book.
There are 2 volumes, really.
It was a 2-volume.
That size.
which would have been a bad idea, too volume.
It seemed so.
I remember thinking, isn't it great that I can file electronically so it's not like a 1,200-page manuscript? It's just a little file.
There are those little things that count the number of words.
I guess it does.
On your computer.
Yeah, I remember religiously avoiding those little counting things. I didn't want to see how big it had gotten. It topped 300,000 words. I remember that. 305, I think. An average book is 80 to 100. Yeah. Could I ask you what you thought when you got that many?
I think Rick and I had been planning a holiday. that didn't look very possible right there.
Yes.
It was, but again, this guy is a writer, and when he realized that a 2-volume biography would not work for Mordecai, you needed to have the entire thing there. He would have also thought 2 volumes was way over the top.
Yes.
That one good biography should do it. And but that apart, the core of everything he was saying was so good that it was a question of just making sure that all that came out as one whole arc so that you could take it from beginning to end.
Mm-hmm.
This extraordinary beginning to this really poignant end. And we've had so many people tell us, tell you that they weep at the end of the book.
You said there has to be the life and times.
Yeah.
Which was already, you're right. What I remember thinking was that this man's life covered almost the emergence of modern Canadian culture and literature. That he was there. I mean, he literally was odd jobbing for the CBC within weeks of the CBC being founded.
Yeah.
And he covered, he was there, sort of an absent presence during the emergence of cultural nationalism. Then, of course, he became its most vocal opponent, while also being sort of the highest profile writer internationally. And he saw Canadian literature almost through to the literally he died in July 2001, so to the 21st century. So I thought, well, here is, above and beyond Mordecai Richler's life and his wonderfully complex character, here is a narrative of Canada, of our Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And also, perhaps, a narrative of a Canada that's passing out into something else already. I never had any desire to judge him.
There was warts and all.
Yes, and in fact, as I mentioned, complexity of character is a dream for a biography. Mordecai Richler was very comfortable with conflict. He was very comfortable with irresolution, with lack of resolution. He didn't ever even want to be necessarily consistent. What he wanted to be was authentic and responsive to his times. He said, and this goes back to our decision to subtitle it the way we did, my ambition is to be an honest witness to my times.
Mm-hmm.
So from my point of view, there was never anything he did that was bad or weak or poor in judgment.
Right.
He wasn't, I lay it all out.
Like the drinking, for example.
The drinking, for example, which is something that was a point of, certainly.
There were famous tales of his drinking, or notorious tales of his drinking.
That's right, and we kept them in despite a couple of comments from family members that it seemed like I mentioned drinking in every sentence, which I didn't, but I did, that comment did make me aware of where I could be a little more judicious in referencing the glass of scotch.
That's
which
right,
was
how much is real and how much is storytelling by others who...
Right, and that would be an instance, Louise, where I did heed Florence's comments. She said, remember that he was very uncomfortable in public.
This is true.
He needed a scotch to help him. She didn't like the word shy, she preferred the word naturally reserved or
and reticent,
reticent or inward somehow.
Yes.
Remember that, and remember too his sense of mischief, she would say. Remember that he liked people to think, well, there's that lush Mordecai Richler with his scotch. He liked putting them on, and he was a mischievous man. It was everything from mischief, if you will, with Quebec sign laws to switching people's shoes outside their hotel rooms back in he was a mischievous man.
Yeah.
That gave me pause for sure. But I thought if there's one Canadian writer who I would be happy to spend 3-4 years with, it was this man. And the other lesser point was that I don't think we produced many good literary biographies in Canada. I think they've fallen back onto too many academics to produce rather tight, small, desiccated biographies with the facts right, but almost everything else either just not there or underdone. And I just thought you can't do that for Mordecai Richler. He is maybe our most outsized literary figure. He deserves a big, brawling, life, blood-filled book. So I thought, well, let's have a go at that.
Yeah, and I want to add to that one of the things that made us really, really thrilled that Charlie wanted to write this is that because he was exactly that, he also deserved a writer who was equally generous and willing to brawl. And you're a brawling, generous-hearted writer yourself. And so he was going to get that. And so that's very important.
I think that writing this book made me want to be a more courageous writer. Made me want to be a more honest writer, because he was incredibly courageous. You may not like half of what he said. You may think he was a jerk. You may think he went way too far on the language, his criticism of the language laws. It's nearly impossible to find someone who's neutral about Mordecai Richler. Jewish Canadians have very strong views. French Quebec, English people remember him from being a real severe critic of 1960s England, everybody. But he was so honest, and he was so willing to be engaged. It's easy to sign protest letters and so forth as a writer, but I would argue that, along with Margaret Atwood, Mordecai Richler is the most socially engaged Canadian writer. You forget how engaged he was. You forget that he was at a newspaper column where he was going after everybody from the Reform Party, you name it. You forget that he wrote articles taking down Brian Mulroney in office. And then it would show up the next week at the Conservative Convention. There's this article he wrote where he calls, I forget what he calls Brian Mulroney's cabinet, like snivelly and greasy or something. And then he shows up at the convention with his cigar the next week. I mean, you may think that's...
Ready to take them on.
Ready to take them on. And he was a lion. So thinking about this man for 4 years, again, this is aside from anything else, I thought, yeah, that's what you're supposed to be if you're doing this. You're supposed to be that ballsy, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and without sentimentality and without pomposity.
Absolutely.
Without pomposity of any kind. And those who knew him well loved him. It's hard to find anyone who didn't know him well who didn't love him. But he gave short shrift for what he came.
Did you interview Richard Dreyfuss at all?
Did you interview Richard Dreyfuss at all?
No, I did not.
Okay, the reason I think I somehow got the impression he must have had somewhat of a relationship with Mordecai, because he did the narration on the program Life and Times of Mordecai Richler on the television.
That's right. All the time he played cards at the Richler house, between shoots. They did become kind of friends. And then many years later, Richard Dreyfuss, who I gather is a fairly mercurial individual, decided there should be a sequel to Duddy. And Louise could speak to this, because when you first signed Mordecai Richler to Knopf, it was for his book on Jerusalem and a novel that was loosely declared a possible sequel to Duddy Kravitz.
Yes, that when he was beginning Barney's version, he did very specifically in the contract describe it as a sequel to Duddy Kravitz. And then it took on, and you can see where that remained if you know both books, but it took on a life of its own and moved way beyond that. But that was in his head, that was what he was looking at.
So there was a brief meeting again where, and I got this from Michael Levine, Mordecai's entertainment lawyer in Toronto, that Richard Dreyfuss said, I'm coming to Montreal, let's talk about a sequel to Duddy Kravitz, a film now, not a novel. And they had a lunch with Michael. Michael flew up for it, but nothing came of it.
I think that's it. Thank you, everybody, so much. Charlie, thank you.
I don't know what to say. I think if those of us who asked some terrific questions and the rest of us are somewhat speechless, such a wonderful afternoon with the two of you, Louise and Charlie. Thank you so very, very much.